You are about 4 seconds away from being warm. A dial, a switch, a button on a wall. That is the entire distance between you and a comfortable temperature, and you will cross it tonight without noticing you crossed anything. Winter used to last 4 months, and there was no switch. But the strangest part is not how your ancestors suffered through it. The strangest part is what the cold made them build. Start with the conditions, because the word winter is doing a lot of quiet work here. Around 20,000 years ago, at the coldest point of the last ice age, Europe was not the place on your map. Sea temperatures dropped. Winter sea ice spread south. The ocean largely stopped doing the one thing it does for that continent, which is keeping it mild, and what was left behind was dry, open, and continental, closer to modern Siberia than to anything you would recognize from a window seat. Permanently frozen ground reached deep into Central Europe. Now, stop looking at that from above and stand inside it. The soil is frozen, so there is nothing to dig up. Snow lies for months, so every step costs more, and every animal is harder to track. You get a handful of daylight hours, and your body, which is essentially a small furnace with opinions, is burning fuel just to hold its own temperature while you sleep. For roughly a third of the year, nothing grows, nothing ripens, and nothing can be gathered. So, what do you actually do? Archaeologists describe the choice as stick or twist. Either you stay in one place through the whole season, or you keep moving and follow whatever is still alive. Both options are expensive, and almost everything your ancestors invented for winter was an attempt to make one of those two survivable. The first invention was not a house. It was a needle. For most of human history, clothing was improvised. Skins, draped, held closed by hand or by a pin. That works down to a certain temperature, and then it simply stops working because loose clothing lets the wind straight in, and a cape does nothing at all for your fingers. Then something very small starts showing up in the ground. A sliver of bone with a hole drilled through one end. The oldest-eyed needles known come from Siberia, around 40,000 years ago. They turn up in the Caucasus around 38,000, in East Asia around 30,000, in Europe by 26,000. Think about what an eye actually gives you. It lets you pull a thread through hide with control. Control gives you seams. Seams give you clothing that follows the shape of a body instead of hanging off it, and that gives you layers, including the inner ones, which is where almost all of the warmth really comes from. The archaeologist Ian Gilligan, who has spent his career on the relationship between clothing and climate, puts it bluntly. However good you were at hunting and gathering, you were not going to push into northern Siberia without sophisticated, fitted clothes. The cold sets a hard limit, and thread is what moves it. And here is the detail that should stay with you. The land bridge into North America was open long before anybody walked across it. The route was not the problem. Some of the oldest sites on that continent contain needles, and it is probably no coincidence at all. Your ancestors did not conquer the North. They sewed their way into it. The second invention was architecture, and it was built out of mammoth. In 1965, a farmer in central Ukraine was digging out his cellar when he hit something enormous, a mammoth jawbone. The excavation that followed, led by the paleontologist Ivan Pitoplichko, uncovered 4 circular structures assembled from mammoth bones and tusks. 149 bones in the original count for a single ring. Skulls set into the base, ribs and tusks framing the walls. Each structure somewhere between 12 and 24 square meters, with a hearth near the middle. There are no trees on a glacial plain, so people built with what the plain had. A study published in 2025 redated the site using methods tied directly to human activity rather than to whatever happened to be lying nearby, and placed the use of one structure at around 18,000 years ago, in the harshest phase of the whole ice age. And now the honest part, because you deserve the argument and not just the picture. Archaeologists have been disagreeing for decades about what these rings actually were. Houses? Storage? Something ceremonial. The archaeologist Alexander Pryor, working on a similar bone circle further east, has argued that the picture is messier than the tidy hut reconstruction in every textbook. The same 2025 study found evidence in tiny mammal remains that one structure was in use across as much as 4 centuries, which points to somewhere people returned to again and again, rather than a shelter thrown up for one bad season. What is not in doubt is the effort. Mammoth bones are heavy. A skull alone is a job for several people. Somebody stood on that plain and decided that getting through winter in that exact spot was worth moving 149 of them. When was the last time you moved anything that heavy for a season that had not arrived yet? The third invention was food, and this is where your intuition will quietly betray you. You would assume that winter hunting is about meat. It is mostly about fat. Lean meat on its own cannot carry a body through a cold season. There is a ceiling on how much protein a human can process, and past that ceiling, more meat does not help you. It hurts you. Northern hunters have understood this for as long as there have been northern hunters, which is why the valuable parts of a winter animal are the fat, the marrow, and the organs, and the muscle is very nearly a byproduct. Which explains something odd about the winter record. On a wind-swept terrace above a river in Austria, there is an open-air site with signs of intensive winter use between 24,000 and 20,000 years ago. Stone tools, ornaments, and an overwhelming concentration of reindeer bones. Reindeer are not the largest animal on that landscape. They are not the most meat available. But a reindeer in winter carries the finest hide in the north, dense and hollow-haired and almost unbeatable as insulation. And the researchers working that site argue that this is precisely the point. Those groups were not only choosing what to eat, they were choosing what to wear. Then there is storage, which is the hardest of the three to see because a pit of frozen meat leaves almost nothing behind for anyone to find. But frozen ground is a freezer, and people living on frozen ground use it. Digging a hole in autumn for a meal in February is a strange and demanding kind of thought. It requires you to believe in a version of yourself who does not exist yet. Summer never asks you to think like that. Winter asks every year. Now the part where the ground gets less solid, because there is one claim about winter that made headlines everywhere and is still being fought over. In 2020, the researchers Antonis Bartzokas and Juan Luis Arzuaga examined human remains from a cave in northern Spain, roughly 400,000 years old. What they described were lesions in the bone, interruptions in growth, concentrated in adolescence, of a kind seen in animals whose metabolism shuts down for part of the year. Their conclusion was that these early humans hibernated, that they slowed their bodies right down and slept through a stretch of about 4 months. The bones of a hibernating cave bear were found in the same cave. It is a spectacular claim, and the objections arrived almost immediately. There are other explanations for those lesions, and the most obvious one is ordinary seasonal starvation, endured while wide awake. Large mammals, bears included, do not truly hibernate in the strict technical sense. They enter torpor, which is shallower and easier to break. The paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer and others pointed out that a large human brain is expensive to run even at rest, which makes a full metabolic shutdown very hard to picture. There is a geographical objection, too. The winters at that site were cold, but dry, not the deep snow and blizzard the word hibernation puts in your head. So, did anyone actually sleep through winter? The honest answer is that the case has not been made, and the simpler explanation has not been ruled out. It is still being argued about, in public, by serious people. That is a less satisfying answer than a documentary would give you, and it is a much more accurate one. Put the three real answers beside each other now. Clothing, shelter, storage. They are all the same kind of solution, and it is worth naming what that kind is. You cannot change the season, so you change what you carry into it. And every one of them outgrew the problem it was invented for. The needle made for warmth became the tool that decorated, marked, and signaled, because in a world where everybody is covered up, clothing is the only place left to show who you are. The bone rings raised against the cold are the oldest architecture anyone has found. And the pit dug to hold frozen meat is the beginning of planning for a future you cannot yet see, which is arguably the single most powerful habit your species has. Winter did not slow your ancestors down. Winter was the pressure that forced the inventions. There is a modern echo of all this, and it is smaller than you would expect. Millions of people find the dark months genuinely hard. They treat winter as something to be got through, count the weeks until it lifts, and quietly write off a third of the year. That reflex is not weakness. It is one of the oldest seasonal instincts you own. The difference is only this. For your ancestors, the answer to a long winter was never endurance. It was preparation, months in advance, by people who knew exactly what the cold was going to ask of them, and who spent the warm season answering the question early. You are still about 4 seconds away from being warm. They were 4 months away, every single year, and they closed that distance with a needle, a bone wall, and a hole in the frozen ground. You did not stop needing winter. You just turned the heating up. The next one leaves Europe completely. Same question, other side of the planet, in a place where winter as you mean it never arrived at all. What did ancient humans in Australia do? Sources are in the description, as always.